What we are witnessing above us has moved beyond curiosity. It has become confrontation. The kind that forces the entire scientific community to face the limits of what it believes it understands. For months, something extraordinary has been unfolding in the night sky, something that began as a quiet entry in a research log and has grown into a question so large that it unsettles even the most rational observers. What first appeared to be a distant traveler from deep space has evolved into a phenomenon rewriting the rules of how we define the universe itself. At the center of this growing mystery stands an object scientists named 3I Atlas. When it was first detected by ground-based telescopes scanning the outer edges of the solar system, it appeared harmless. A faint glimmer moving through the blackness, slow, dim, and unremarkable. The initial calculations suggested it was another comet, perhaps one of those rare wanderers originating beyond the gravitational boundaries of our Sun. That alone made it scientifically valuable. Humanity had confirmed only 2 other interstellar visitors before. So the announcement was met with excitement, not alarm. No one suspected what was coming. But the data began to shift. Small inconsistencies at first. Anomalies in its light curve. Deviations in trajectory models. Every major observatory tuned its instruments toward the coordinates, expecting to confirm the standard behavior of a frozen body drifting through solar heat. Instead, the readings returned contradictions. Within days, the numbers stopped making sense. It was brightening far too fast. Its gas emissions were off the charts. And its coma, the luminous cloud of vapor that forms when a comet nears sunlight, was expanding at rates that made even veteran astronomers doubt their equipment. At Harvard, one of the world's leading astrophysicists reviewed the telemetry and said the words no one wanted to hear: this might be technology. Not a comet. Not ice. Not rock. But something engineered. Something powered. Something from somewhere else. The idea spread like an electrical current through the global research networks. What had been whispered privately inside academic groups was now stated publicly. This object was defying every physical rule known to describe natural celestial behavior. It was as if an invisible intelligence had taken hold of it and forced it to perform an impossible dance through our solar system. 3I Atlas did not glide like a passive stone. It surged. The coma swelled until it spanned distances that dwarfed planets. Early calculations estimated it at hundreds of thousands of miles across, nearly rivaling the Sun's diameter. To put that into perspective, you could fit the planet Jupiter, our solar system's largest world, inside that glowing envelope and still have space left over. No comet had ever displayed such magnitude. None had ever survived the forces required to sustain it. The models failed. The equations broke. Teams recalibrated their sensors, thinking they had made computational errors. But the results repeated with chilling consistency. The object's brightness increased exponentially, as if an inner engine had ignited. Observatories from Chile to Hawaii to Japan recorded identical patterns, sharp bursts of light followed by stable lulls, then another burst, rhythmic, purposeful. Some said it looked mechanical. Telescopes locked onto it day after day, and every new image deepened the mystery. The coma was not smooth or symmetrical. It boiled. It churned like a storm. Jets of vapor erupted from beneath the surface at irregular intervals, creating plumes that twisted in spiral formations. It was chaos, but there was something organized beneath that chaos, as though the eruptions followed commands rather than randomness. Beneath that veil of gas, the nucleus, the core of the object, remained hidden, too bright to see, too compact to resolve. But its stability told scientists something remarkable. It was not weak. It was not porous or fragile like an ordinary comet core. It was holding together under pressures that should have shattered it to dust. And yet, even with this violent outgassing, 3I Atlas did not disintegrate. Every computer model said it should have torn itself apart weeks ago. Instead, it strengthened. It behaved like an engineered object enduring an environmental test. Each surge of internal pressure met an equal resilience. Its structure absorbed the chaos. It endured. The longer scientists studied, the stranger it became. When its path was plotted, its motion did not perfectly match gravitational prediction. It followed a hyperbolic trajectory, yes, proof that it had originated from beyond our solar system, but within that motion were small deviations, subtle shifts that implied guidance. It adjusted course ever so slightly, as though correcting for drift. That kind of precision could not be explained by random jets of gas alone. Harvard's astrophysicist introduced a ranking system from 0 to 10, to classify unidentified cosmic phenomena. 0 represented purely natural events. 10 represented objects whose behavior implied artificial design or technological intent. For the first time in his career, he placed a real object at level 7. Meanwhile, NASA and the European Space Agency redirected their resources to gather data from every possible angle. Hubble captured high-resolution images. The James Webb Space Telescope analyzed the light spectrum streaming from its coma. What they found forced another rethink. The gases venting from 3I Atlas were not dominated by water ice, as nearly all comets are. Instead, they contained high concentrations of complex organic compounds and heavy elements inconsistent with any known natural ratios. There were traces of metals that should not exist in such abundance within an interstellar ice body. It was as if the object was composed of something synthetic, a layered structure of exotic matter interacting with sunlight in unfamiliar ways. Even the radiation patterns looked wrong. When sunlight strikes a normal comet, the heat vaporizes the sun-facing side, and the solar wind pushes the emitted dust away, forming a tail that always points opposite the sun. This has been true for every comet ever observed. But when the high-exposure images of 3I Atlas returned, they showed something no one could explain. Alongside the faint tail trailing away from the sun, there appeared a sharp, coherent beam of light projecting forward directly along its path of travel. A single, concentrated beam that did not flicker or scatter, piercing through the darkness ahead of it like a searchlight. No natural process could produce a forward-facing beam of coherent light in space. It defied physics. It was not reflection, not scattering, not a dust jet seen from an angle. It was controlled emission, directed energy. Every lab that checked the data confirmed the same finding. The beam was real. When these results reached the global academic networks, debate erupted. Some called it instrument error. Others accused digital noise or software artifacts. But then observatories from different countries, using different instruments and different calibration systems, independently verified the same beam. At that point, denial became impossible. The phenomenon was authentic. And that realization spread a chill through every department of astrophysics on Earth. One of the leading voices, Avi Loeb, the same Harvard scientist who once suggested that the object known as Oumuamua might have been extraterrestrial technology, spoke again, publicly. He said there was no known natural mechanism that could explain what was being observed. A directed beam of light implies intention. To sustain it over time requires energy control. It hinted at machinery. And if that were true, then 3I Atlas was not a comet at all. Speculation multiplied. Could it be a probe? A navigational device designed to map interstellar routes? A data relay transmitting information across the void? Or even a propulsion system, a kind of light sail engine using energy beams for directional control? Each hypothesis carried staggering implications, and none could be fully disproved. The object's survival through impossible internal pressures, its hyperbolic path, its changing luminosity, and now its directed beam, each new observation stacked evidence toward an unnerving possibility. The cosmos was not as silent as we had believed. We were witnessing technology moving through our neighborhood of space. As if to heighten the tension, the object was approaching its perihelion, the moment of closest proximity to the Sun. This would be the ultimate test. Solar radiation at that distance is merciless. Any natural comet reaching that point usually disintegrates or fractures under the heat. 3I Atlas was expected to do the same. The astronomical community waited for the inevitable. Telescopes were trained. Data streams were prepared. The event would reveal everything. And then, as though following a script written by the universe itself, the object slipped behind the Sun. From Earth's perspective, it vanished completely, moving into the blinding glare where no telescope could see. The timing was perfect, or perfectly suspicious, depending on who you asked. During that window of weeks, while hidden behind the Sun, no human instrument could monitor its behavior. It was beyond our line of sight, beyond every lens and sensor. Astronomers called this period the superior conjunction, a time when even our most advanced satellites are blind. For the scientific world, it was agonizing. For those who believed the object was artificial, it was something worse. They began to wonder if the timing was deliberate. Because in orbital mechanics, passing behind a star is not only concealment, it's opportunity. A spacecraft can use a star's gravity as a slingshot, altering its speed or trajectory without using fuel. If an advanced probe were performing such a maneuver, the Sun would hide its actions perfectly from human observation. By the time it emerged again, its path could be changed completely. It could even enter stable orbit somewhere within the solar system, and we would never know until much later. The thought unsettled everyone paying attention. An interstellar visitor of unknown origin, capable of resisting destruction, producing coherent light, and vanishing at the one moment when we are physically unable to watch it reads like fiction, yet the data remains factual. The universe gave us a question and then hid the answer behind the Sun. Now, we wait. The observatories remain prepared. Every telescope, every radio array, every deep space monitoring system holds position, waiting for 3I Atlas to emerge once more from the solar glare. When it does, it might appear as dust, confirming natural decay. Or it might return intact, altered, perhaps even accelerating. Until then, speculation is all we have. The cosmos has gone silent again, holding its secret just beyond our reach. And somewhere, on the other side of that star, an object moves alone, steady, and possibly aware. Weeks passed. The object remained hidden behind the Sun, unreachable by every instrument built to measure the heavens. For astronomers, those days felt endless. The scientific community became silent not from lack of discussion, but from the weight of anticipation. Every observatory from the Atacama Desert to the far Arctic skies was waiting for the first signal of re-emergence. The longer the silence stretched, the more restless everyone became. When the Sun's glare finally shifted and the first narrow windows of observation opened again, arrays worldwide came alive. Telescopes swiveled, antennas adjusted, computers began running search algorithms through oceans of data. Everyone expected either debris or nothing at all. But what they found was something neither expected nor explained. 3I Atlas had survived. It did not fragment. It did not dissolve into a dust cloud. It reappeared whole, bright, and even more massive than before. The coma had not faded, it had grown. The diameter now measured over 700,000 miles, a scale so enormous that it defied the limits of standard physics. If its luminosity before had challenged understanding, now it mocked it. The brightness was not static, it pulsed, rhythmic, deliberate. Almost as though something at its core was alive and communicating through bursts of radiance. The global network of astronomers and physicists fell into chaos. Some declared the readings must be wrong again. Others began calling it the pulse object. But no one could deny what they were seeing. Even instruments operating on opposite sides of the planet were capturing identical wave patterns, measurable, repeating, structured. The pulse intervals were not random. They followed ratios consistent with base mathematical sequences, primes, logarithmic spacings, harmonic intervals. These are universal constants, the kind used in interstellar communication attempts because they transcend language. For the first time in recorded history, scientists had to ask a question they had only entertained in theory: were we witnessing an intentional signal? Radio telescopes tuned in, hunting for electromagnetic activity associated with those light pulses. And faintly, almost hidden within background cosmic noise, something emerged. A pattern. Not a continuous transmission, but bursts of radio energy synchronized perfectly with the optical pulses. They were faint, barely above detection thresholds, but real. AVI Lab and his colleagues at Harvard assembled an emergency working group composed of experts in astrophysics, radio astronomy, signal analysis, and data encryption. Their task was simple to describe but nearly impossible to perform: determine whether those signals represented natural harmonics or artificial design. Weeks of analysis followed. The data was cross-referenced, filtered, and compared with known natural phenomena: solar flares, plasma interactions, magnetic interference. None matched. The intervals between pulses exhibited too much precision. The decay curves were too clean. Natural processes produce chaotic noise, but this emission followed rules: mathematical, elegant, deliberate. Meanwhile, optical telescopes observed new behavior. The forward-facing beam, the impossible, coherent light, was now fluctuating in direction. Not randomly. Slowly, systematically, almost like a scanning motion. Every few hours it adjusted by degrees, sweeping across vast segments of space before locking again on a fixed vector. The consensus was unsettling. It looked like the object was mapping. As the data accumulated, the object's velocity showed subtle change. It had decelerated. Not from gravitational drag, but by what looked like deliberate braking. Its hyperbolic escape trajectory was flattening, curving toward a bound orbit. That should not be possible for a natural object entering from interstellar space without propulsion. But propulsion appeared to be exactly what it possessed. If this were indeed a controlled maneuver, then it was doing something extraordinary, using our star's gravitational pull not to escape, but to anchor itself. The Sun, for all its power, was becoming the pivot point for a visitor from beyond. The question now shifted from what is it to why here. For decades, scientists had estimated that even if intelligent civilizations existed elsewhere, the chances of direct encounter were infinitesimally small. The universe is too vast, distances too immense, communication too slow. Yet now, something was here inside our solar system, visible to human eyes, performing actions that resembled intent. Governments took notice. Space agencies that had once shared data freely began restricting access. Military satellites were repositioned. Signals from deep space radar systems were classified. But secrecy could not suppress public curiosity. Amateur astronomers around the world began tracking 3I Atlas using personal telescopes, sharing real-time data across encrypted networks. In the age of global observation, nothing stays hidden for long. The object stabilized near an orbital path intersecting the region between Mercury and Venus. It wasn't random placement. That location offered continuous solar exposure and gravitational balance ideal for something powered by light or electromagnetic energy. Scientists ran simulation models and found that the orbit was too precise to be coincidental. It was stable, efficient, calculated. As weeks turned to months, 3I Atlas maintained its position. Its pulses became more refined, the intervals tightening. A pattern began to emerge, not in raw numbers, but in ratios, frequencies, harmonics. It resembled a form of structured encoding. The possibility that humanity was observing a broadcast became too strong to ignore. Linguists joined the analysis effort. Data scientists developed algorithms to convert the pulse intervals into binary sequences. The result was a string of repeating numerical clusters, ones and zeros arranged in sequences too short to convey language but too structured to be random. The preliminary analysis revealed fractal recursion within the signal, patterns repeating at micro and macro scales, like the structure of DNA or Mandelbrot sets. It seemed to carry meaning through geometry, not words. The implications were staggering. Either the object was designed to transmit something far beyond human decoding capabilities, or its structure itself was the message. And still, the light continued to burn. The beam stretched ahead of it, constant, unwavering, as though guiding its own journey or pointing toward some invisible destination deep in the dark. Some speculated it was scanning for other vessels. Others thought it was projecting information, perhaps a form of cosmic navigation, marking its path across systems like a lighthouse signal echoing through eternity. Then, in mid-observation, something changed again. The forward beam flickered once, twice, and then widened. It split into 3 separate rays, each diverging at equal angles before stabilizing. The central beam remained on its original vector, but the other 2 pointed toward coordinates that, when plotted, aligned precisely with the orbits of Earth and Mars. The coincidence was too precise to dismiss. Scientists stared at their displays in disbelief. The object appeared to be directing energy toward 2 inhabited planets, one living, one barren, both significant in human history. Radio observatories detected a corresponding shift in signal frequency. It moved into a range specifically overlapping with those used for planetary radar mapping. The implication: 3I Atlas was scanning us. Governments issued denials. Official statements downplayed the event as solar interference. But independent data told another story. The radio emissions carried phase-locked modulation, an engineered pattern used in data transfer systems. Someone, or something, was encoding information into those transmissions. AVI Lub addressed the world through a live broadcast. He said the quiet truth many scientists were too cautious to voice. If this object was artificial, then it represented an intelligence capable of traversing interstellar distances, surviving stellar proximity, and communicating through universal constants. It would be the first known instance of contact, not in message form, but in presence. He paused, then added something that would echo for years: if it wanted to hide, it would have remained invisible. It wants to be seen. In the following days, observation data became increasingly complex. The pulse frequencies began cycling through mathematical constants, pi, e, the golden ratio. Each sequence repeated twice before resetting. Some interpreted it as a countdown, others as calibration. But when the intervals stabilized, they locked on one final ratio, the exact time signature between the Earth's rotation and orbit. The message, if message it was, had become unmistakable. It was synchronizing with us. 3I Atlas had chosen its reference point. Humanity had become part of its equation. As that realization sank in, a new kind of silence spread, not of ignorance, but of awe. The scientific community, for all its instruments and equations, stood humbled. We were no longer observers of a cosmic mystery. We were participants in it. The universe had answered back, not in words, but in light. And somewhere beyond the veil of our understanding, something watched to see if we would notice. The first anomalies began quietly. At observatories across the planet, receivers started registering faint interference within the radio spectrum. It began as barely perceptible static, a background hum that oscillated just below measurable thresholds. At first, operators dismissed it as environmental noise. Solar storms. Atmospheric scatter. Routine interference. But within days, that hum evolved into rhythm. Across multiple stations, from California to Canberra, the same interference appeared at identical frequencies. Every time researchers adjusted their instruments to compensate, the pattern shifted, mirroring their calibrations as if aware of their attempts to isolate it. The precision unnerved even seasoned engineers. Static doesn't respond to human instruments. Noise doesn't adapt. Yet this signal did. Within weeks, the hum evolved into structured patterns, bursts of amplitude modulation that repeated at fixed intervals, each one mirroring the pulse timing of 3I Atlas's light emissions. The correlation became undeniable. Whatever this signal was, it originated from that object. When analysts mapped the frequency drift, they discovered something even stranger. The transmission wasn't purely radio. It was hybrid. Fragments of the signal extended into microwave and low-infrared ranges, bands not typically associated with natural emissions. It was as if the object were broadcasting across multiple channels simultaneously, testing which one reached us best. Space agencies across the world coordinated. NASA, ESA, Roscosmos, JAXA, and even private observatories pooled their data. When the compiled results were plotted, the interference patterns formed coherent wavefronts, mathematical spirals based on logarithmic scaling. The structure was too precise for accident. It resembled a language made of geometry and resonance, encoded in electromagnetic form. The world media began to report cautiously. They called it the Atlas signal. For most people, it sounded like another science headline, something abstract and distant. But inside the research labs, the atmosphere shifted from curiosity to reverence. This wasn't a random cosmic event. It was a message delivered through physics itself. And then, the interference changed again. One night, deep space communication arrays across the globe simultaneously went offline. At the time, each was oriented toward the same coordinates, those of 3I Atlas. Systems reported no hardware faults, yet signal feeds dropped to zero. When technicians manually rebooted the systems, every receiver displayed the same line of binary text, repeated across screens worldwide. It read, 000101110101, 0000. 16 bits. No checksum, no header, no format. But it wasn't random. When decoded into ASCII, it corresponded roughly to the letter P. It meant nothing in isolation. But then, the same sequence appeared again, exactly 21 minutes later, identical, down to the last digit. Engineers confirmed the systems weren't hacked. The data was injected through the radio feed itself, from space. Someone, or something, had spoken. Governments immediately went into lockdown mode. Data sharing was restricted. Public access to deep space channels was limited. But scientists continued their work quietly. Within private circles, teams began constructing translation frameworks using symbolic pattern matching and entropy analysis. If the signal repeated, they would be ready. It did. Over the next 48 hours, the binary stream expanded. Short sequences, then long ones. Repetitions interwoven with harmonic echoes. The data formed blocks separated by consistent gaps, pauses, like breaths. When converted into visual spectrograms, the waveforms formed intricate symmetrical shapes, nested triangles, spirals, and grids. They weren't random noise. They were blueprints. A team at MIT, working under tight secrecy, used Fourier transforms to decode amplitude variations into vector data. What they found stunned everyone involved. The output rendered as a geometric projection, a three-dimensional pattern resembling an orbital path. At first, it looked like an artistic abstraction. But when mapped against solar coordinates, the geometry matched perfectly with the current trajectory of 3I Atlas. The implication: the object was transmitting its own flight plan. And yet, the pattern continued beyond its known orbit, extending far outside the solar system into an uncharted vector pointing toward a specific star nearly 11 light-years away, Epsilon Eridani. The same star system humanity had long suspected could host habitable planets. If the data was accurate, 3I Atlas wasn't merely passing through. It was navigating. The structure of the signal deepened. Each burst contained recursive layers, data within data. When decompressed through nested harmonics, the signal revealed minute variations synchronized with the background cosmic microwave radiation. It was interacting with the universe's oldest light, using it as a carrier wave. No human technology had ever achieved that. As decoding progressed, another layer emerged. Within the electromagnetic field near Earth, subtle fluctuations began aligning with the pulse frequencies of Atlas's transmissions. Satellite magnetometers recorded them. Power grids experienced microsecond disruptions matching those intervals. Even auroral patterns over the poles began pulsing faintly in the same rhythm. It was as if the planet itself had become part of the signal chain. The realization spread quickly through closed scientific networks. We were not simply observing communication, we were part of it. The Earth had become an antenna. AVI Lub described it as the universe whispering through resonance. The phrase caught on. Yet the deeper truth was less poetic and more profound. For the first time in history, humanity was no longer looking outward for signs of intelligent life. The signs had reached inward, touching the physical systems that sustain our civilization. At this stage, the question was no longer, is it artificial? The data had answered that. The question was, what is it trying to say? Some argued the transmissions were navigational automated instructions between distant probes. Others proposed it was a form of greeting, encoded in mathematical constants. But a growing number of scientists began to notice an unnerving pattern. Each transmission cycle contained subtle references to Earth's orbital data, adjusted daily. The object was tracking us in real time. As the realization spread, geopolitical tension followed. Nations accused one another of interference. Defense agencies feared the signal might contain unknown technological hazards, data viruses transmitted through EM spectrum, capable of infiltrating communication systems. But tests revealed nothing malicious. The signal was clean. Pure information. Then something happened that turned uncertainty into shock. For the first time, the object responded to us. A coordinated experiment between NASA's Deep Space Network and the European Space Agency attempted to transmit a reply. They encoded a message based on prime numbers and atomic constants, a universal mathematical handshake. The transmission was directed toward 3I Atlas using the largest radio arrays available. 19 hours later, the object answered. The beam of coherent light, its headlight, flared 3 times, paused, then flashed the same sequence back. Perfect synchronization. The delay matched the distance and speed of light. It was direct confirmation of acknowledgement. In a single moment, humanity crossed a line it could never retreat from. We were no longer observers of an unknown phenomenon. We were correspondents. The event triggered a cascade of consequences. Stock markets wavered. Religious institutions issued statements. Governments held emergency briefings. For the general population, it became the only story that mattered. But for scientists, something deeper took root, a realization that communication was no longer theoretical. The cosmos had answered. As transmissions continued, the message grew more complex. The signals began incorporating phase shifts corresponding to known constants, Planck's length, hydrogen spectral lines, fundamental ratios that define the structure of reality. It was as though the object was teaching, constructing a shared framework of understanding from the ground up. In one transmission sequence, the amplitude variations formed a visual when translated into grayscale intensity. The image resembled a lattice, a repeating grid structure resembling crystalline geometry. Embedded within it were smaller subpatterns, each fractalized into perfect golden ratio proportions. To mathematicians, it was a language of form, not sound, a syntax of physics itself. The conclusion was unavoidable. Whoever or whatever sent it understood the laws of the universe more intimately than we do. As data accumulated, the message began hinting at purpose. The coordinates encoded within its geometric transmissions shifted slowly over time, tracing a looping path around the Sun before extending outward again toward Jupiter's orbit. It was as if the object were preparing to move, to realign. Some theorized it was plotting a new trajectory. Others whispered of rendezvous. When asked what humanity should do next, Avi Loeb said something that summarized the collective unease: "We are listening to intelligence across cosmic silence. The question is not whether we can answer. It's whether we should." And still, the signal pulsed. And still, the light burned. Each second, 3I Atlas continued to glow against the black vacuum, its coherent beam now shifting rhythmically as though keeping time with the heartbeat of a civilization unseen. The object had come from the void. It had survived the sun. It had spoken to us in numbers and light. And now, it was waiting. When the waiting ended, it ended without warning. One morning, before sunrise, every magnetometer on Earth spiked simultaneously. Power stations reported brief oscillations in grid frequency. GPS satellites drifted by fractions of a degree, forcing emergency recalibrations. Even cell towers across continents flickered in synchronization, like a pulse of invisible static sweeping through the planet. The cause wasn't terrestrial. It came from space. Observatories tracking 3I Atlas confirmed the source within hours. The object had emitted a burst of electromagnetic radiation, short, intense, but clean. It wasn't random. The wave carried harmonic structure, organized into precise logarithmic intervals, the same sequence that had defined its earlier signals. The difference was power. This pulse had magnitude. It was strong enough to ripple through Earth's magnetic field. For a moment, satellites lost orientation. Ground systems went blind. And then, almost as quickly, everything returned to normal. No permanent damage. No lingering interference. Just silence, absolute and heavy. The world held its breath. When instruments stabilized, the object was no longer where it had been. It had moved fast. Its orbit had shifted outward by several million miles in a matter of hours, an acceleration impossible under known physical laws. No visible thrusters, no detectable exhaust. It had simply changed position, as if guided by forces invisible to our technology. This time, it was heading toward the inner solar system, toward us. The velocity was measured at over 130,000 miles per hour. Astronomers confirmed its path intersected Earth's orbital plane. The projection suggested a near pass, not a collision, but the margin was razor-thin. Even a deviation of a few thousand miles could alter everything. Global agencies issued no public alert. The official line described the object's motion as consistent with natural outgassing events. But inside control rooms and classified briefings, the tone was far from calm. The most advanced propulsion systems humanity had built couldn't replicate that acceleration. And no comet could survive the forces required to achieve it intact. Yet 3I Atlas did. As it moved closer, something new emerged. Its forward beam shifted from steady white to a deep, iridescent blue. The change wasn't aesthetic, it indicated a frequency shift. The light had transitioned into ultraviolet wavelengths, invisible to the naked eye but blazing bright to scientific sensors. That change carried meaning. Ultraviolet light penetrates dust, gas, and interference. It was optimizing visibility. It wanted to be seen more clearly. At the same time, its radio emissions began broadcasting continuously, not in pulses. The data stream poured into every active receiver tuned to its frequency range. When decoded, the binary data formed dynamic sequences, shifting, living mathematics that evolved as if adapting to the interpreter. AI-assisted decoding algorithms tried to track the pattern, but it adjusted faster than machines could predict. It was learning from us. The realization hit quickly. The object wasn't simply transmitting anymore. It was interacting. When NASA's Deep Space Network sent a low-bandwidth ping toward the object to test latency, the response came back instantly. No measurable delay. Not the 19-hour round trip expected at that distance. It replied faster than light could have traveled. The data path defied causality. Either the object had developed predictive capability or it was operating on physics we didn't understand. Around the same time, observatories began reporting visual anomalies near the object's coma. Subtle distortions in background starlight, like gravitational lensing. Except the degree of distortion didn't match mass estimates. The implication was startling. The object might be manipulating space itself. Gravitational readings showed microfluctuations consistent with localized curvature, space bending and relaxing, repeatedly, in rhythm with the object's internal cycle. It wasn't large-scale enough to resemble a black hole, but it behaved like controlled gravity modulation. Energy manipulation at that level would require mastery over forces beyond current human comprehension. Then the solar winds changed. Normally, the charged particles emitted from the sun flow in consistent patterns, curving gently under magnetic influence. But when they reached the vicinity of 3I Atlas, they bent sharply, forming a vortex around it like water swirling around a stone in a stream. Instruments measuring solar flux detected a drop behind the object, as if it were absorbing or redirecting the incoming radiation. That discovery raised a new hypothesis. 3I Atlas might be feeding. Not biologically, but energetically. It could be drawing power directly from the solar wind, converting charged plasma into usable energy. That would explain its sustained luminosity, its impossible motion, its longevity. As it drew closer to Earth's orbit, the light grew stronger. For the first time, the object became visible to the naked eye as a faint blue star tracing across the twilight horizon. News spread instantly. Amateur astronomers began posting videos of the moving point of light on every social platform. The footage flooded the internet faster than governments could control. The world was watching now. Within days, every human with a camera turned their gaze upward. The blue glow became a nightly presence, silent and constant, a reminder that something beyond us was approaching. Some called it the second star. Others called it a messenger. Religious leaders spoke of signs. Scientists spoke of evidence. The public spoke of fear. Then came the first direct atmospheric effect. High-altitude sensors began detecting ionization layers above the stratosphere forming in patterns matching the object's pulse frequencies. Aurora-like glows appeared at latitudes far from the poles, red, blue, and white curtains of light rippling silently across tropical skies. Instruments confirmed the phenomenon wasn't geomagnetic activity. It was external excitation, Earth's upper atmosphere responding to the object's energy output. At the same time, certain communication frequencies started experiencing repeating interference at narrow bands centered around 1420 MHz, the hydrogen line, the universal constant frequency used by scientists to search for extraterrestrial communication. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. 3I Atlas had shifted its emissions to the one frequency every civilization capable of radio astronomy would recognize. The response from the scientific world was electric. SETI arrays reactivated full power. Private research stations joined. A message appeared imminent. When it arrived, it was nothing like anyone expected. The signal began with a single tone, steady, pure, and perfect. Then, slowly, it split into harmonics. The harmonics formed intervals corresponding to the Fibonacci sequence, building upward in complexity until they became chords, mathematical sound rendered into vibration. It wasn't random noise. It was music. But beneath those tones lay structure. Data embedded in the harmonics, layered through amplitude modulation. When decoded visually, the data revealed a series of evolving forms, geometric, organic, interconnected. Patterns resembling molecular chains, lattice frameworks, double helices. It looked biological. At first, researchers thought it was a symbolic representation, a mathematical metaphor for life. But as resolution improved, the data revealed explicit molecular sequences. Amino acid structures. Hydrogen bonds. Nucleobase arrangements. It was a code. 3I Atlas was transmitting the structure of DNA. The sequence wasn't identical to Earth's, but close, familiar bases arranged differently, as though describing an alternate biochemistry based on the same universal principles. A living system shaped by another world. The implication shattered every boundary of science and philosophy. We weren't looking at an artifact anymore. We were witnessing an archive. A message embedded in light describing how life could exist elsewhere. And then came the final phase of the signal. Coordinates. Encoded at the end of the sequence was a precise spatial location, an orbital region between Earth and the Moon. The data repeated endlessly, every cycle emphasizing those coordinates. The meaning was simple. It was inviting us to look there. Observatories obeyed. Telescopes across the world turned toward the designated coordinates. For several hours, they saw nothing. Then, faintly, a second object appeared, small, dark, silent. It reflected almost no light, a shadow against space. But radar confirmed mass. It had not been there before. 3I Atlas had brought something with it. The second object showed signs of life while orbit hovered between Earth and Moon. At first observers saw only faint thermal flickers. Instruments across networks picked them up simultaneously. Engineers compared timestamps. All matched. The object pulsed like a heartbeat. Each pulse synchronized with 3I Atlas's rhythm. The link was undeniable. Radar returned rough-shape data. The dark mass resembled a capsule. Surfaces absorbed light. Reflections registered at odd angles. Spectrometers read unusual compounds. None matched known meteorites or human alloys. Magnetic sensors recorded local distortions. Small craft would not produce those readings. Whatever this was, it behaved with design. Then the object emitted soundless modulations. Radio arrays converted the patterns into audio tones. The tone sequences sounded musical at first. Then the pattern shifted into ordered clicks. Data teams applied decryption layers. The clicks formed binary frames. Frames built into images when plotted as intensity maps. The first clear picture surprised everyone. It showed a curve. The curve matched Earth's horizon. The image resolution increased over successive frames. The capsule transmitted close views of surface features on the near side of the Moon. Craters, ridges, small shadowed hollows. The images included coordinates. The coordinates pointed to a narrow region near Mare Imbrium. The world reacted. Telescopes and radar fixed on the spot. Satellites prepared observation runs. Drones launched from private platforms altered trajectories. Military trackers monitored telemetry. Public feeds flooded with theories. Scientists kept calm. Inside labs they worked non-stop. At the target site, ground-penetrating radar from lunar orbit found an anomaly beneath regolith. A hollow cavity the size of a city block. Structure edges showed angular geometry. Signals bounced back with spectral signatures matching those from the capsule. The capsule had given a map and pointed to its partner. Then human teams received a direct message. Not a burst of mathematics. Not an abstract code. A sequence of glyphs formed on multiple screens. The glyphs repeated in cycles. Computational linguists ran pattern analyses. The glyphs displayed symmetry and recursion. They included mirrored pairs and rotational invariants. Algorithms designed to detect language structure flagged them as syntax instead of ornament. Decoders constructed a provisional grammar. They treated recurring glyph clusters as nouns. Repeating separators functioned like pauses. After hours of iterative mapping, the team produced a working translation key. The key remained crude and subject to revision. Still, it provided a bridge. The first intelligible phrase emerged. It read in human-translated form as follows. Greetings. Observe. Exchange. The phrase did not sound like human prose. It sounded like protocol. Formal, concise, functional. The transmission continued. Lines followed with increasing complexity. The next cluster offered 3 data modules. Modules included elemental ratios, time reference markers, and a simple star chart with vectors. The vector set included Earth and Moon positions relative to a distant point within Epsilon Eridani. The message included a handshake protocol. It suggested reciprocal exchange of minimal information at defined intervals. The tone remained neutral. No commands. No threats. No requests for surrender or submission. The translation group held a private briefing. They recommended a cautious reply. The reply followed minimalism. It contained universal constants. It included the hydrogen line frequency and prime number sequence. It encoded a simple image. The image represented a human silhouette beside the moon and a small dot labeled Earth. The reply transmitted through multiple channels. Teams routed it through hardened arrays to avoid interference. 3 hours later the capsule answered. A short burst. Then silence. Researchers replayed the burst repeatedly. Once decoded, the burst released a simple animation frame sequence. The animation showed a rotating object. It revealed internal chambers when rendered in vector form. One chamber contained a lattice similar to the DNA-like patterns Atlas had sent. Another chamber displayed an energy matrix similar to the light beam mechanics observed earlier. The capsule returned a single phrase in translation form. The phrase read, "Observe. Protect. Link." The translation included no further context. Interpretation divided into 2 schools. Some argued the phrase meant passive observation and environmental stewardship. Others read it as instruction to connect. Political leaders argued for restraint. Space agencies argued for engagement under strict protocols. The public demanded transparency. Meanwhile, the capsule initiated local activity. Small robotic probes deployed from its surface. They remained near the lunar site. Video feeds showed them hovering over shallow hollows and sliding into shadowed cavities. Each probe emitted low-energy pulses. When probes contacted regolith, sensors recorded microstructural changes. New crystalline formations appeared in overtones matching Atlas's spectral signatures. The probes collected samples and sent back high-resolution compositional maps. The mineralogy revealed complex organometallic chains not known on Earth. Chains formed repeating motifs with quasi-biological folding. Chemists called them protopolymers. Scientists recognized a pattern. The probes did not harvest material destructively. Instead, they induced controlled rearrangement. They triggered lattice reconfiguration using directed energy at the molecular scale. The process resembled manufacturing. The capsule built structures out of local matter using minimal input energy. It performed fabrication using environment as feedstock. That discovery raised new questions. If foreign technology could assemble complex structures on the Moon, then protecting lunar heritage took on new urgency. International bodies convened emergency councils. Treaties from decades prior lacked clauses for non-terrestrial fabrication. Rapid policy drafting began. Public sentiment swung. Some voices hailed the event as a gift. Others warned of contamination. Religious leaders framed the arrival as omen. Artists created works within hours. Markets fluctuated. Funding shifted toward space science. Citizen scientists streamed data feeds and organized grassroots observation campaigns. Back in labs, the capsule transmitted a longer block of encoded data. Teams processed it through multi-tiered filters. When decrypted, the block compiled into a layered visual sequence. At first glance, it resembled a fractal. Zooming in revealed scenes. Each scene presented an ecological tableau. Strange flora-like lattices grew beneath a pale star. Small mobile entities grazed on energy filaments. Structures rose resembling woven scaffolds. The imagery carried motion, not static diagrams. It suggested process and adaptation. Analysts drew a possible conclusion. The capsule offered a cultural archive. It shared information about a biosphere, its engineering approach, and survival strategies. The archive did not include language in the human sense. Instead, it transmitted method, how to build, how to synthesize, how to maintain systems across environmental extremes. Then came a transmission that halted all debate. The capsule streamed a sequence of prime-based pulses synchronized with human heartbeat frequencies. The sequence translated loosely into an instruction set for safe approach procedures. It included precise steps for rendezvous with small unmanned assets. It contained timing windows, vector adjustments, and energy thresholds. The plan prioritized caution. It specified no biosample retrieval without multi-agency oversight. It demanded neutral observation until mutual intent proved friendly. Agencies drafted cooperative missions. Unmanned craft prepared to rendezvous with the capsule at a safe distance. Engineers built passive beacons and shielding protocols. The plan aimed to test interaction protocols while preventing cross-contamination. As the first unmanned craft executed approach maneuvers, 3I Atlas reacted. Its forward beam softened and then widened into a halo. The halo encompassed the capsule and the approaching probe. Data logs recorded a handshake exchange in which the probe transmitted a vector-coded status. The capsule returned a confirmation waveform. Both signatures showed micro-adjustments in phase indicating synchronized timing. For a brief interval, human instruments recorded matching resonance between machine and foreign device. Then a startling moment. The capsule emitted a sequence not previously seen. The sequence matched a harmonic series present within Earth's own natural systems. It echoed the frequency bands of the human brain's alpha waves. Translators flagged the sequence and labeled it a bridging protocol. The bridge targeted cognitive resonance patterns rather than raw data. Researchers responded with caution. Ethical boards convened. Experiments paused. In private, neuroscientists ran simulations. They tested whether exposure to such frequencies affected neural patterns. Early trials in controlled environments produced minor shifts in EEG coherence. Nothing destabilized. No harm resulted. Still, the team recommended strict limits and non-invasive monitoring. Throughout those tense months, several truths became clear. The arrival did not resemble invasion. The transmissions favored exchange and instruction. The capsule acted as an emissary and tool. The probes behaved as fabricators rather than harvesters. The mathematics of communication leveraged shared constants. The objects used presence and pattern rather than coercion. And yet uncertainty persisted. The builders remained absent. No biological entities revealed themselves. No voice spoke. The archive implied origin stories but offered no direct lineage. The visitors remained anonymous. Their vessels acted with restraint and focus. They operated under a protocol oriented toward interaction with other systems. Whether that protocol favored reciprocity or precaution remained unclear. Humanity stood at a crossroads. A clear path emerged for cooperation and study. Another path offered secrecy and weaponization. Decision-makers chose a middle route. They prioritized transparency in science and caution in approach. They opened observation to international oversight and kept diplomatic channels limited to scientific councils. The capsule continued its work in lunar shadow. Probes fabricated a small structure on the regolith. The structure did not resemble human architecture. It aligned with principles seen in Atlas's transmissions. It integrated energy collection surfaces and lattice frameworks. The assembly process occurred without heat signatures strong enough to damage sensors. It operated as if material rearrangement used quantum-level control. As the first human-made probe completed its remote inspection, the capsule transmitted an image. The frame showed the assembled structure beside a human probe. A simple glyph hovered above both objects. The glyph translated as link. The message contained no ceremony. It contained intention. Humanity responded with a restrained signal. The reply used the same minimalist protocol found within the capsule's grammar. It expressed willingness to observe and learn. It encoded a promise to protect the site and to restrict harmful action. The capsule replied with a final phrase for the cycle. Stay. Watch. Grow. Then silence returned for a period measured in lunar cycles. Observatories recorded fewer bursts. The capsule's activity slowed to maintenance pulses. 3I Atlas shifted its orbit slightly outward. Its beam dimmed to a gentle shimmer. The world adjusted to a new normal. People walked streets with new questions in their eyes. Children drew blue stars and dark capsules. Politicians promised oversight and investment. Scientists drafted long-term plans. At night, under the blue point of light, humans looked up and felt a small, precise shift in perspective. The universe had provided a contact protocol. It offered knowledge and the method to receive more without forcing exchange. Humanity had a choice. The first decision would define the next century. Part 5 ends with one clear fact. The dialogue opened. Whoever sent the capsule had chosen method over mystery. The visitors did not demand obedience. They extended an instrument and a syllabus. The future would depend on human response.